Hello, welcome to this week's Midweek Connection. My name is Todd Jordan. I serve as senior pastor here at Strawbridge United Methodist Church. I am delighted that you've joined me. We are in the middle of the season of Lent, and I thought I would look for this week at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. I'll let you read that yourself, but it is the feeding of the 5,000. And what's going on is Jesus is trying to get away with his disciples to a deserted place, looking for some time for some quiet and reflection, and wouldn't you know, a crowd sees them, and Jesus feels sorry for them because people are looking for leadership, they're looking for ways to connect with God, and they know Christ can do that, and Jesus knows he can do that, so he teaches them, and they're there well into the evening, and finally the disciples are like, look, you know, folks are here, they need to go home so they can give them something to eat. Jesus looks at his disciples and says, you give them something to eat. And they look at him like he is crazy because this is 5,000 people, not 5,000 men, plus women and children. And so they're like, look, you know what, we're just gonna spend our money. That would be like 200 denarii, which is basically 2/3 of a year's salary, which is not something they would have had on their person at the time. And they can't understand what Jesus means. So Jesus says, well, what do you have? And they say, like 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And apparently that's enough. And so they're able to feed everyone. And verse 42 says, all ate and were filled. And then it continues and says, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. So 5,000 men plus women and children. So when I was reading this the other day, I sort of asked myself, how do you feed over 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish? And instantly in my head, I heard this voice say, well, you can when Jesus is at the head of the table. We never feel like we have enough. We feel like we're running out of time, running out of energy, overwhelmed. And there are days when we get up and we say, how am I going to make it through? We have to ask ourselves, who's at the head of the table? When Jesus is at the head of the table, it seems like there's enough. I know during the season of Lent, especially when we may be reflecting on our mortality, reflecting on our weakness, even reflecting on our sin, which is always a good and healthy thing to do, right? To examine our hearts and see what's in them and what's not right. But it can be painful. It can be overwhelming. We have to remind ourselves that if we keep Jesus at the head of the table, there's always enough grace, there's always enough forgiveness. And if we go out and we find that life is overwhelming, that we just don't feel like we know how we're going to make it through, again, same thing. With Jesus at the head of the table, there's always enough. So I just want to encourage you, whatever season you're feeling like, maybe you feel like everything's fine and everything's going well, or maybe you're just struggling to get through the next day. Wherever you are, keep Jesus at the head of the table, and you will find that you have enough. May God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you this Sunday in worship.